They say nothing is certain but death in taxes. But what about tariffs? We know they affect trade, and we know trade affects cars. A tariff is a tax imposed by one country on goods from another. And the debate about tariffs is older than America itself. Do they help? Do they hurt? Let's find out. No one likes paying taxes. I think the Beatles put it best in their seminal hit Taxman, when they sang, "Fornicate in my fortress, 40K still my mortgage, 24K my toilet, all my taxes reported." That was either the Beatles or Rick Ross. I always get them mixed up. But taxes are in the headlines again as new tariffs were just announced. So, do tariffs work? The US has had a storied past with tariffs. In fact, if it wasn't for tariffs, we might not be a country at all. The year is 1765. The American colonies still answer to their daddy, Great Britain. Colonists are pretty chill about it, but resentment is growing. Over the next decade, Britain continued to impose more and more taxes on the colonies, which were met with more and more resistance. Most notably, the Boston Tea Party, which was in retaliation of the Townshend Act. It was this act that placed an indirect tax on products such as glass, paint, paper, and tea, and that includes iced tea. In 1773, Boston colonists dumped 92,000 pounds of tea into the Boston Harbor. That basically kicked off the Revolutionary War and led to the birth of the US of friggin' A. Let's kick it up to 1.21 gigawatts and zap to 1930. Pretty much the whole world is affected by the Great Depression one way or another. While other countries got a prescription for Lexapro, the United States turned to tariffs to try to dig themselves out of the red. In the early months of the act, it was a success. Construction contracts and industrial production all increased dramatically. However, because of weak-ass banks, the success was short-lived. The resulting trade war did nothing but hurt the US economy. Isolationism and protectionism backfired louder than a 2JZ. FDR vowed to make it right, and after winning the election, passed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, relaxing tariffs of foreign imports. Cut to 1961. Post-World War II America is doing great economically. Almost every industry is growing, especially chicken farming. The US starts exporting vast amounts of juicy chickens to Europe on the cheap. The influx of affordable poultry from the States meant that Europeans could afford to eat more chicken. And eat they did. And the US made up nearly half of the European imported chicken market. Many countries saw this as a slap in the face. Germans accused the US of artificially plumping the chicken titties with arsenic, and the French just outright banned chicken exported from the US. The hysteria was referred to as the chicken tax, and the tariffs rose higher than a dirt child in the rafters. They attempted to diplomatically make things right with Europe. Diplomacy ultimately failed, and the US made their move. President Lyndon B. Johnson imposed a 25% tariff on brandy, dextrin, potato starch, and light trucks. Oddly specific, until he realized that those are exports of, you guessed it, Europe. The light truck stipulation was a huge middle finger to Volkswagen, whose van sales had been doing wunderbar in the US. After the tariff was put in place, Volkswagen's sales of the bus dropped by a third. In subsequent years, sales of Volkswagen vans and trucks were nearly non-existent. That's why you don't see VW trucks on American roads anymore. The tariffs were sending a clear message. Mess with our chickens and hitches, get stitches. Because trucks have hitches. European car manufacturers weren't the only ones affected by the taxes. Japanese manufacturers Toyota, Mazda, Datsun, and Isuzu were met with resistance when they tried to import their trucks and utes to the US. My mentor, Dr. Ian Malcolm, once said,
"Life finds a way."
And indeed, car manufacturers found a way to import their cars into the US using some pretty creative methods. Japanese manufacturers found they could ship chassis cab configurations. The chassis skeleton was shipped and taxed only 4% upon arrival, and then was assembled with a light truck body in the US. The government caught on and the loophole was closed in 1980. Even Ford got in on the action by importing their transit light trucks in from Turkey with passenger seats installed in the back. Once they reached the Baltimore port, though, the seats were taken out and shredded, and the truck transformed back into a light cargo truck. The process cost Ford hundreds of dollars in shredded upholstery, but saved them thousands of dollars in tariffs. In 1980, US President Ronald Reagan put into law a limit for Japanese vehicle sales. Japanese car companies had somehow convinced American consumers that cars could be affordable, safe, and reliable, and had in turn started selling cars hand over fist. The protectionist president was having none of that. The number of vehicles Japan was allowed to sell within the US dropped nearly 10% within just the first year of restrictions. Reagan did this to give American car companies a better shot at dominating the domestic market. So did the big three hunker down and take Captain Miller's advice? No. The companies acted like entitled rich kids with carte blanche. Do you know who my dad is? Come at me, bro! Without the fear of better cars encroaching on their territory, American car companies artificially raised prices by reducing the amount of cars coming off the assembly line. Decreasing supply increases value. That's microeconomics. Is that macroeconomics? Supply and demand, my dudes. And they laid off 60,000 workers. And the quality of the cars went down while car buyers were hit with an average of $1,000 hike on car prices. You know what they say, give a mouse a cookie and that mouse will eventually destroy the middle class. In fact, this false sense of security set the tone for the US auto industry for the next 2 decades, and ultimately can be linked to its near collapse before the bailout of 2009. But the Reagan-era tariffs did something else. In order to retain a share of the American auto market, foreign car companies set up American factories to build their products. Regardless of your stance on what it means to buy American, there's thousands of American auto workers in Ohio, Kentucky, and all over the United States who are employed because of foreign-owned auto companies building their cars in this country. So now we're hearing a lot about new tariffs, and the debate is raging again. And the biggest drawback to the tariffs, as I see it, doesn't have to do with numbers. It has to do with people. If you haven't noticed, I love cars, but not just American cars. Cars from anywhere are cool, and people everywhere can agree on that. Thanks to Fixed for sponsoring this episode of WheelHouse. Fixed is the Bluetooth OBD2 reader that connects wirelessly to your smartphone and helps you diagnose check engine lights and keep an eye on your car's performance. Click the link in the description to get 10% off your order with promo code DONUT. Every week here on WheelHouse, we talk about the issues that affect you and the car world. So hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. If you want to learn more about imports, check out this episode of WheelHouse on how to get an R32 Skyline. If you want to see more of James, check out this episode of Up to Speed. Follow Donut on Instagram at Donut Media. Follow me at Nolan J. Sykes. Be nice. See you next time.